Well, the Shadow Finance Minister, James Paterson, has warned his party a Nigel Farage-style agenda could lead to the destruction of the Liberals. The senior frontbencher has declared a populist turn will lead the opposition to abandon free market thinking. He also called for an end to the party's mass public therapy session, arguing it must resist false choices of both Reform UK and the Teal economic policies.
Those who advocate the Liberal Party become a free market version of the Teals and we stop fighting so-called culture wars are really just advocating that we surrender in those culture wars, that we allow the left to dictate the terms of social and cultural and identity issues. The economy should be at the heart of our offering, but it cannot only be about the economy. Otherwise, I think we become quite a hollow and soulless party that only speaks to people's material aspirations.
Joining me live now is Liberal Senator Jane Hume. Jane, what did you think of that speech and also the heart of the message that James Paterson's trying to get through to some in your party?
When I read it last night, Laura, I sent James a message saying that he made some very good points there. We need to focus on not the seats that we hold, but the 33 seats that we need to win. And I think that's exactly what James was saying here. Now is the time for us to develop that policy agenda, that compelling policy agenda for mainstream Australia. Make sure that we hold this terrible government to account, but also deliver an alternative government to take to the next election. We do that through strong policy advocacy that's true to our values.
This is similar to what Paul Kelly wrote last week, and I know that it did strike a chord in many of your colleagues. Paul Kelly wrote about, the false prophets of Trump and Farage, essentially saying that kind of politics doesn't work here and it's not going to work for the Liberal Party. Do you agree with that sentiment?
I have to admit, I read that Paul Kelly article and found myself nodding along. It is so true. Those of us that might feel the need to adopt populist policies might find that the Liberal Party ends up being the second most popular populist party in Australia. That's what One Nation do. There's no point being the second most popular. We want to make sure that we put together an alternative policy agenda that speaks to mainstream Australia, because that's what the Liberal Party has been about since its inception, and we should continue to do so. Those values that the Liberal Party hold dear, freedom and choice and personal responsibility, reward for effort, the importance of small business and the dangers of big government, the centrality of family, these are values that speak to mainstream Australia. The question now is, how do we put those values into an alternative policy agenda, an electorally appealing policy agenda that speaks to ordinary Australians? Yeah,
I think there's a lot of people in the party that would have sent James similar messages this morning that you did to him as well. But there is a not...
The good news is James is a really central character in the leadership team. So let's hope that he's sending that message home every single day to the leader and to those in the leadership team, because that's where the change gets made.
Do you think everyone in the party will agree with him, or do you think there's still a sizable chunk of the Liberals who want to take the party in a different direction? They do believe in the Farage style of politics, that it can maybe work here?
I think that there's a lot of people that believe that there are some big issues facing Australia right now, and the Liberal Party can't afford to stick its head in the sand. It does need to come up with those credible policy solutions to some of those big problems. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need to move in a populist direction. You can understand after an election loss like the one that we've had, the devastating election loss, how there can be a little bit of introversion and soul searching. But James is right. Enough's enough. We shouldn't be on this worldwide national policy apology tour. It's time to get the work done. Put forward that policy agenda. Get on with the job.
Yeah, group therapy, he described it as. Is that what it's been like? Kind of everyone calling each other up saying, oh, what about this? And shouldn't we be doing that? And what are your feelings? Lie down.
Well, look, there's a review that's being done, and of course there's discussions in the party room. You would expect that, but draw a line in the sand, move on. Now's the time to do the work, start putting together that policy agenda, speak to ordinary mainstream Australians, adhere to our Liberal Party values that are timeless and that do appeal to ordinary Australians. We just have to turn that into a policy agenda, and in the meantime, not let this terrible government get away with the decisions that it's making.
Okay, let's talk about super then. Let's talk policy, Jane, because there was a sizable change in the super tax policy that was announced by Jim Chalmers earlier this week. What do you think about it? Sensible change? Is it something that the opposition would actively consider supporting?
I love the way you refer to it as a change, because let's be honest here, Laura, this is an enormous, humiliating backflip from a Treasurer that has said that he was going to stick to these guns for the last 2 years. Let's not forget that this was a policy that they said that they were never going to apply in the first place. They took to the election a commitment that they weren't going to change superannuation and that they weren't going to introduce new taxes. Then, all of a sudden, they did. And it was a terrible tax. A tax on unrealised capital gains, and it was unindexed. Now, unrealised capital gains was a dumb idea in the first place. Having it unindexed, well, that was just immoral. So it's so important to fight back on that. Peter Dutton did. He said not only would we not support it, but we would repeal that terrible legislation. Now, Labor won the election. They had a mandate to introduce it, but the pressure was so strong because this was such bad policy.
But was
We've
it, Jane?
now seen this humiliating backflip by Jim
Was it enough
Chalmers.
of a feature? Did the coalition prosecute this enough during the election campaign?
Well, you can see now that even from opposition, even after an election that has a mandate to introduce, with enough pressure, you can actually overturn bad legislation.
I know,
and that's exactly what's done here.
What I'm asking,
but
Jane,
there's
is
something
was
here.
there enough pressure during the campaign to turn this into more of an election victory for the opposition? Because obviously on the numbers it didn't do that, but I don't think from memory that this was prosecuted enough by the opposition. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, to be honest, let's be honest here. I mean, Peter Dutton said that we would not only oppose this legislation, but we would repeal it. Now, that comes with a price. It meant that we had to find additional money to make sure that we went to the election with a better budget bottom line, which we did, but it wasn't done easily, and it came at a cost, an electoral cost. But now we have something really interesting here, Laura, and there's two things that I think people have missed in this conversation. The first is I've been watching some of the social media that's been coming out of particularly the sort of backbench Labor members of Parliament, and they're crowing about something called the LISTO. This is the Low Income Super Tax Offset. And they're saying that this is part of the New Deal that Jim Chalmers has brought forward, and that it's going to be fantastic for women's superannuation. Well, this is spin beyond all spin. The reason why the LISTO needs to be changed is because of that 70 cents a day tax cut that Labor took to the last election. What that would have meant is that people, women in particular, who are on lower incomes, would have paid more tax by putting their money into super than they would have if they had have taken it as income. Well, that's outrageous. I mean, the whole point of superannuation is that you get a concession to put your money into super so that it's quarantined for potentially up to 40 years. So this was an error on Labor's behalf that they are now reversing. They didn't even realise they'd made this mistake until it was raised by me at Senate estimates just before the election. And they looked at each other with horror when they realised what they'd done.
Right. Well,
so
Jane,
that's mistake number one.
It was raised by you. I do remember that. But I mean, you're talking about, Peter Dutton at the time saying that he would repeal what was on the table at the election as well. But my whole point is that this really wasn't prosecuted loudly. This was not a huge feature of the campaign. Should you have made more of it? Could it have been not just a policy win, but more of an electoral win?
I don't agree with you, Laura. I've got to say, I feel like I shouted this terrible, terrible legislation from the rooftops, not just during the campaign, but for the 2 years leading up to it. But there's one more thing that's been missed here, and that is this was the only revenue measure that Jim Chalmers took to the last election. So now his budget is completely blown. There is a great big budget black hole that somehow he's going to need to fill. So what's he going to fill it with? Is it going to be a new tax on family trusts? Is it going to be on the family home? Is it going to be getting rid of the discount on capital gains? There has to be something, otherwise he's got an enormous black hole that he simply hasn't got a solution to fill. So the question now for the coalition is, are we going to support this change? Are we going to oppose it? Are we going to repeal it? I heard that Andrew Bragg has already said, well, this is a new tax and we are the party of lower taxes. Let's see what how that conversation unfolds in shadow cabinet and in the party room, because it's going to be a really important one for the
What do you think? You're in the Senate.
Well, it's a very good question. If we are genuinely the party of lower taxes, we should be opposing new taxes. If we want to make sure that we go to the election with a better budget bottom line, that's something we're going to need to consider. It was tough in the last election campaign. It'll be just as tough this time around if we decide to repeal this legislation.
Yeah, so you haven't made up your mind, and that's exactly why it's a bit of a wedge for the coalition, isn't it? You want to be the party of lower taxes, so why would you be on the books supporting this government to raise them?
Well, I think that there's more that we can do in superannuation, and I know I've spoken about this with you before, Laura, but I've introduced a bill to tackle the gender super gap, that intractable 25% that means that women retire with less retirement savings than men. There is a way to deal with that, and that's to give couples an opportunity to split their superannuation evenly between them throughout their working lives, not just when they get divorced. This perhaps is something that we could consider as part of this superannuation package to make superannuation fairer.
Jane, good to talk to you today. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You too, Laura.
I want to bring in now the Australian Financial Review political editor, Phil Coorey. Phil, really interesting what Jane said about that. Obviously, it's a pretty tough one, whether the coalition supports this or not. What do you think?
Yeah, it's dead right, Laura. I mean, Chalmers did two things the other day. He sort of capitulated on the proposal on taxing high value superannuation accounts, but he bolted onto it a completely unrelated measure, which was the Listo, bolstering the lower end of lower income earners' superannuation to ensure they're not paying more tax on their super than their income. They're unrelated, but it does act as a wedge. If you're thinking